Hi, I'm Chris Mayer, Senior Solutions Consultant at Tealium. Today we're going to walk through how you can build a Customer 360 activation architecture using both your Snowflake data tables as well as Tealium's Customer Data Hub. And so specifically, we'll look at how we set up both the Tealium inbound native data source from Snowflake into Tealium, as well as how we can send Tealium process data back into Snowflake using our outbound streaming connector using the Snowpipe API.
We'll first look at the reference architecture. So our goal with this was design almost a bidirectional connection between your Tealium data and your Snowflake data, and really try to create what we would call a consented and correlated customer interaction feedback loop between the two systems, and sort of taking advantage of what each system does best and being able to keep both the profile data and any of the segmentation data between the two systems in sync. And so if we start on the left side of the architecture, we'll be looking at first how Tealium can land data into Snowflake based on its outbound connection using the Snowpipe API. And so Tealium would deliver, in this case, data from its real-time sources that it collects. And you can see that in the bottom left box on my screen. And so all of Tealium's real-time interaction data sources across websites, email, whatever you have set up in Tealium can be streamed into a specific Snowflake table using Snowpipe. And it can be either the event data or profile data. As users of Tealium will know, we do process both. And so you do have that flexibility to land entire event payloads or subsets of event payloads using Snowpipe, or same story with profiles as well. You can land the entire profile object or a subset of it into Snowflake. And so all of that real-time interaction data gets processed into Snowflake, in addition to, of course, all of your other enterprise sources or outside sources that you're bringing into Snowflake, across transactions, historical, MDM, identity, any AI or modeled data too. All that comes together into your Snowflake environment. And then, of course, what we're going to have from there is all the different, enrichments, aggregations, resolutions as it pertains to kind of harmonizing that data and enriching it within Snowflake. We'll come back to the visitor stitching box there at the bottom as we move from step 2 here into step 3. Just to kind of close the loop, on the other end of this, right, is where we'll be leveraging Snowflake as a data source inside Tealium. And so you'll also see that connection get set up as well here in the demo, but that's intended, of course, to take data out of Snowflake and put it back into Tealium, creating that kind of feedback loop between the two systems. And of course, primarily going to be interested in profile and segmentation data delivered back into Tealium, so we can drive all those different things on the right side of my screen: customer engagement in terms of real-time personalization, updating our campaigns directly, or even doing customer service type actions or next best action journey orchestration type things with those end systems. And so Tealium kind of in this case, right, very much lives on both ends of your Snowflake architecture, both in terms of being a source of data into Snowflake, but also a recipient of that data. Now, returning to that visitor stitching box we have here in the middle, really what we want to make sure we just call out here is that when we're bringing data back from Snowflake into Tealium, we want to make sure the identities are being stitched into Tealium profiles, basically syncing the profiles, so to speak. And so that does mean you want to make sure in your Snowflake data, we have visitor identification or user identification data that matches your stitching key ring inside Tealium, and to ensure, of course, that your Snowflake data actually gets stitched back to those profiles. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone needs to be concerned about that. As I mentioned, of course, we do pipe event data as well. And so if you're just working with event data, it's not a concern. But certainly if we're doing any identity-based or profile and segmentation-based data sharing between the systems, you do want to make sure those two things are a match, which we will see in the demo as well when we take a look at how we configure the connections between both the inbound and outbound Snowflake data connectors we offer. So we'll first look at Tealium's Snowflake Streaming Connector. This connector is designed to deliver data back to a Snowflake table in about 5 seconds. It is near real time, both for importing event and visitor data directly into Snowflake staging tables. And so inside Tealium, of course, we'll have the Snowflake streaming connector available in your connector marketplace here. You can just search for it. In this case as well, because we can send both event and visitor data, you'll have the option to leverage the Snowflake streaming from either the event stream or the audience stream feature, just depending on, of course, if you want to be sending event data, you'd use event stream. And then, of course, if you want to send profile or audience data, we would use audience stream. And so in this case, you're looking at the audience stream connector inside Tealium, which will send profile data back to that Snowflake staging table. And so just like any other Tealium connector, we'll first just select what segment or list of users we want to send over to Snowflake. So in this case, I'm sending all visitors. I'm not going to set any other conditions on that. We will then add our Snowflake account. And so this will involve inputting our account details, of course, but we only have to do that once. And then obviously, as you can see here, it gets saved. And then finally is the actual customization of the data delivery into Snowflake. And so our goal with this, again, is to make sure we can get the data available for immediate processing as quick as we can inside Snowflake. And so you do have the ability here to send either a custom payload or your entire visitor payload. So in this case, we'll send the entire payload, and then from here, we're just inputting the mappings back into Snowflake. And so we'll first select the database inside Snowflake we want to use based on our account, the schema here, and then finally that table name as well that we looked at previously. That retail 21 visitors table is where we will be sending data to. And then we'll record visitor data into the variant column, as well as a timestamp column in terms of just as the data arrives, timestamping each of that. Now you can control some of that down here in terms of if you don't want to use our default timestamp, you can use an alternative format as well. And then you can also include visit data or just processed visitor data as well in terms of customizing that payload just a little bit further. So in this case, if you're just going to send the entire payload, you're only really configuring database names, table names, and the timestamp in the visitor ID column. That visitor column being critical because this is in data that's intended to be stitched. But if we choose the custom visitor data option, we'll have a mapping specifically for the table values in that case to be able to select which columns from the table we want to do. But in either case, as you can see, when the segment, in this case, all web visitors, when users are populated into that segment, the data is then delivered back into the retail 21 visitors table inside Snowflake. Now, if we want to bring data back into Tealium from Snowflake, we will need to use Tealium's Snowflake data source connector. And so for this example, we're actually going to be taking data out of a Snowflake table and processing it through Tealium. And so I'll use this customer sample table, and we'll go back into Tealium here and into our data sources registry. And of course, we'll find Snowflake here under the data warehouses section. And like all Tealium data sources, we'll just give it a name, and then we're into the configuration details. So you will establish a separate connection here. The outbound and inbound connections we offer into Snowflake can be used independently. But of course, if you're ultimately trying to build that customer 360 data processing architecture, you are most likely going to use both. And so we'll save that connection, of course. And then once we have that connection established, you'll have your table selections, and we'll select that customer sample table. That toggle there for enable processing just turns the polling on or off. And then here on this screen, we begin to design our query settings. And so we support 3 different query modes to let you control how data is imported. There's going to be the timestamp and incrementing option. And so with that, we would import new or modified rows based on a timestamp column and a auto increment column. So in that mode, rows with a newer timestamp than the previous import and a larger auto increment value than the last imported row, in that case, are going to be imported. We tend to recommend this mode because it ensures that everything that is new and updated gets in, but we do have support for just a simple timestamp based off of one timestamp column, or even a incrementing query mode where we're just going to do it based off of an auto incrementing column. So it's sort of both or one or the other. So if we continue here, keep it simple with a timestamp column as an example, I'll just choose my timestamp column from my table. And then we're into the actual query configuration. And so I simply just need to select all the columns I want to bring into Tealium. And so I'll do that. And then I can test the query here as well to make sure that the data is pulling in as I expect. And so you can see that data from our Snowflake sample table. And then as we continue on, this is just a matter of mapping the data attributes from the Snowflake table or view back into Tealium attributes. And so just going down the line here, customer ID to customer ID, first name to first name, etc. And so with each of these, we are just mapping the data from Snowflake, the table or view into Tealium's attribute model. Very critical here, if we're sending customer data, is to match a visitor ID or map a visitor ID into Tealium, I should say. This is how we'll ultimately stitch the data to the profiles inside Tealium. Because ultimately, we're bringing this enriched data from Snowflake, of course, we want to activate upon it. And so we want to make sure we're stitching that to Tealium's profile model. And so you can map specific visitor ID attributes. I'm just doing one here. You can absolutely do multiple, but that will ensure that the data we're importing is going to get ultimately mapped into or stitched into Tealium profiles. And so then we just have a summary. And once we're happy with that, we can click Finish. And then we'll start receiving data from that Snowflake table or view, so long as the connection is enabled.